participating in that. And if you introduce yourself to the class and I don't give you the points, email me to remind me. I think I've remembered everyone who's volunteered, but if I somehow missed, if you'll email me. So thank you today. Don't worry about taking the attendance quiz. I forgot to activate it. I'm sorry. I'll just give everyone points for being here today. Was someone able to take the quiz? Oh, well, take the quiz. I thought I had not turned it on. So if you'll, it's quiz attendance quiz 9. So you had difficulty taking it? Oh, go to the schedule. I didn't put it on the content page. So if you go to the schedule, you should be able to take it. If you have any problem, just email me and I'll make sure that you get the points for today. So we're going to look at the story of Noah's Ark. And this is a quintessential Sunday school story. If you've been in Christian churches as a child at all, you know lots of the details of this story. I would like to add to what you've learned, and I would like to persuade you that the story of Noah's Ark is actually related massively to Jesus. And I imagine that that particular perspective has probably not been one that you've had in Sunday school class. So want to dive in and see if I can make my case to you today. When we come to these two verses, I'm just going to read them and ask you a question. So Genesis 6:14 says, "Make for yourself an ark of gopher wood, make rooms in the ark, and cover it inside and outside with pitch." And then if we go to the story of Moses' basket, it says of Moses' mother, when she could hide him no longer, she took for it a basket made of bulrushes and daubed it with bitumen and pitch. She put the child in it and placed it among the reeds by the riverbank. And on the surface, these two verses aren't really connected very much. You do have something made, you do have it covered over with something, but no real obvious connection. And sometimes when we come to the Bible, and this is why we need pastors who study the original language for us. Sometimes when we come to a passage, there'll be something in the original language that when we find out about it, it will open up a whole new perspective for us. When we come to the story of Noah's Ark, the reason it's very difficult for us to connect it with the Moses story is because usually what happens in talking about the ark is, well, what did it look like? And so you get models and you get size comparisons, Noah's Ark to the Titanic, Noah's Ark to a 747 airplane. I don't know if you know this about Bryan College, but this building that we're in is actually built to the dimensions of the ark. If you want to know how big the 3 stories of the ark, how big it was, if you just walk in this building, that's the measurement that they used when they built this building. So it's a big thing. And when you think about that, and of course we've got this spectacular model built in Kentucky, the Ark Experience, you realize, wow, this was a huge thing. The problem is often that's where we leave this story of Noah's Ark, and we start saying, well, is it really big enough to hold all the food? And how did they handle the drinking water? And what about this? How did it handle the waves? And all those are important questions, but they're not the first important question. There's something in the text that if a good pastor will point out to us, will raise a very important question for us. So in our text, it says, make for yourself an ark. Make for yourself an ark. And in Hebrew, the word ark is the word tebah, and when it's ark of, it's tebath. Make for yourself a tebah of gopher wood. Well, what's interesting, when Moses' mother makes the basket, look at the word tebath. In other words, in Hebrew, the word for Noah's Ark and the word for Moses' basket in Hebrew is exactly the same word. In fact, if we look that up in the Hebrew Bible, those two stories are the only place where the word tebah appears in the Hebrew Bible. Therefore, those stories are connected. And you might ask, well, how are they connected? Well, I wonder if, think about it with me. Moses' mother had this child. The text tells us he was a beautiful child. All the children in Israel were under the decree of death. She hid her pregnancy, and then when the baby was born, she pretended that she still was pregnant and hid the baby. But after a while, you can't be pregnant 15 months. It's like people are going to know you can't really pretend anymore and hide the child. And so she was under this edict from the king to throw her child in the deadly waters of the Nile, where he would drown or be consumed by crocodiles. And so she was faced with this terrible decision. So what did she do? Well, I wonder if the text doesn't invite us to conclude that she knew from oral tradition the story of Noah's Ark. And so she reasoned, well, if I've got to throw my child in the river, the king didn't say anything that I couldn't build an ark for him. And so what she did is she built a little ark, and she put Moses in that little ark, and then she threw him among the reeds. And so when we read the two stories, the use of the word tebah in the original invites us to ask the question, how is the story of Moses in the basket like or unlike the story of Noah's Ark? And once you make the connection, you realize the reason she's covering the ark with pitch is because that's what they had done in Noah's time. She's just making a little ark for Moses. Now, when you come to the whole Bible and you say, well, how does that story relate to other stories? Well, it relates in a lot of ways. You've got all living things being saved in the ark. And then you've got the nation of Israel kind of becoming the group that God saves. And then that nation of Israel is reduced to the person of the Redeemer. And that's exactly what's happening with Jesus. You've got the salvation. The world is under judgment, and so God makes an ark to save everybody. And then the world is under judgment, and so God makes a nation to bring God's missionary work to the world, and that really doesn't work out, so God reduces it to a person. And it's the person of the deliverer who then becomes God's agent to bring that deliverance to everyone else. And that's exactly how it works with Jesus. You have the world is under condemnation. The nation of Israel should have brought God's message, but they failed, and so the Redeemer comes. And just like Moses, the king tries to kill all the children, and God delivers. So Jesus comes, and Herod, just like Pharaoh, tries to kill all the little boy babies, and God intervenes. And when you think of the story of Noah's Ark, it's part of that theme of salvific space in the midst of deadly waters. God makes salvific space. God makes a place where people can thrive in the midst of deadly waters. And we saw when we looked at the Rakia, creation is God's salvific space. He's holding back the waters of the abyss so that the waters of the abyss don't come crashing down on creation. We've got salvific space in the midst of deadly waters with the flood. And Moses is this little microcosm of that salvific space. The salvific space of the ark becomes salvific space in the Moses basket. We have the salvific space at the Red Sea. And in Hebrew, a lot of the same words, dry land, the deep, the abyss, all these words are being used in this story. And God creates salvific space by holding back the water so Israel can go through on dry land. And we have the same thing happening with Joshua at the Jordan. It's a repetition of the Red Sea, and many of the words that are being used, like the water stood up as a heap. Those words in Hebrew are being used again at the story. So Joshua at the Jordan is repeating the miracle at the Red Sea, and you get the idea, oh, it's the presence of God that's holding back the waters, and you come and realize, oh, that's what's happening at creation as well. God is pushing back the abyss so that people can live and thrive. We have Elijah and Elisha coming to the Jordan River and repeating Joshua's miracle of crossing the Jordan River on dry land. And Jesus' baptism, which happens at the same place as Joshua's crossing and Elijah's crossing, Elisha's crossing. Jesus becomes that salvific space. And so just like you've got the world and the nation of Israel and then the Redeemer, now you have that reduced to one person, Jesus, who becomes the salvific space. And then the last one we saw in Revelation 15, where God's redeemed on the shore of the crystal sea, this body of water that somehow is on fire, and yet God's people have gotten safely to the other side, and they're singing the song of Moses. So you have this repetition of salvific space in the midst of deadly waters. That's how we're meant to read the Noah's Ark story, that it's salvific space in the midst of deadly waters. Now, before we jump into that, I want to tackle this question: is it the Red Sea, or is it, sorry about the misspelling, Reed Sea? Is it the Red Sea, or is it the Reed Sea? And you might know that if we were having this lecture and we were at a state university, the professor would say, well, to call it the Red Sea is a mistake, because it's not the Red Sea in the Hebrew Bible, it's the Reed Sea. And that's true. In the Hebrew Bible, it's not called the Red Sea, it's called the Reed Sea, Yam Suf, or Yam Suf. And if we were at a state university, perhaps the professor would say, this crossing at the Red Sea isn't a miraculous event. Basically, Israel went through a mud puddle, and the wind blew the mud puddle apart, and they went across on dry land, and then the wind stopped and the mud puddle went back, and so the chariots got stuck, and they just kind of made up this myth of crossing the Red Sea. Well, there are a lot of reasons that won't work in this story, and the reason it won't work is because the Reed Sea, Yam Suf, is identified as the body of water that touches Elath. And if you look on a map, Elath is at the point where the Red Sea starts. So the fact that it says it's at Elath means that it can't be some kind of mud puddle thing and, just a mini miracle. And if you've ever been to Elath or Evian Gezer, I mean, it looks like the Mediterranean. It's a resort place with jet skis now and boats, and I mean, it's deep, deep water. And so the Old Testament identifies the body of water that they crossed as that place. So there isn't any debate, did it really happen at this massive body of water? The Old Testament has agreed that that's true. And the New Testament does call that place the Red Sea. This Thalasso is sea, and this is the word red. And so we are absolutely justified in translating it Red Sea. But it is true that when it describes it in Hebrew, even though in Greek it's calling it the Red Sea, in Hebrew it's calling it the Sea of Suf, the Sea of Reeds. Well, as much as I enjoy dialogue partners who are willing to question the Bible, this is a case where our lecturer trying to belittle the Bible would just be silly, because there's a reason it's being called the Reed Sea. Let's see if you can see it. When she could hide him no longer, she took him and made for him an ark. That's how I'm going to translate that, or maybe we should translate it a mini Noah's Ark or something. Made of bulrushes, covered it over with pitch, just like Noah did, put the child in it, and placed it among the... So this is our word in Hebrew. This is how you say in or among. put that at the beginning of a word. So this is our word for reed. And this is our word for reed C. And do you see that those are exactly the same word in Hebrew? You see, it's irony. Pharaoh claimed to be the strongest, most powerful person in the world. He claimed to be the ultimate ruler. And he demanded that the Hebrew mothers throw their children among the reeds. He made them at spear point throw their kids in the reeds. And he laughed when those mothers, can you imagine the attachment of a mother and a child, and they with their own hands are going to have to throw their kids in the reeds and watch them drown or watch them be eaten by crocodiles? And Pharaoh laughed because he was the most powerful man in the world and he could do it. And he did it. And he did it over and over and over. And Israel cried out to God, and God said, enough. And God came to the most powerful man in the world and said, I'm going to harden your heart. Pharaoh says, it's not going to happen. I'm going to harden your heart, and you're going to be thrown in the reed sea. And the person who's going to throw you in is your own unforced free will. I'm going to harden your heart by showing you grace. And the more grace I show you, the harder your heart's going to be. And you're going to get to the place where you're going to fight against me, and you're going to throw yourself in the reeds. You made these women throw their kids in the reeds, and your heart was cold, and you laughed as they cried. Well, guess what? I've got some reeds for you, bud. And you're going to throw yourself in those reeds. And Pharaoh says, I don't know who this Yahweh is. And moreover, I will not let these people go. And so God sends this feeble man Moses, and he says, do this so that he can know. And so Moses begins to strike at the things that the Egyptians held as gods. He strikes at the Nile. He strikes at the light. He strikes at the darkness. He, in 10 words, uncreates until they're there, backed up against the water, and Pharaoh with his chariots are going to rush down and rush those people and drown them in the water. And God says to Moses, get your stick and strike the water. And when he does that, Moses looks like he's God at creation, because he strikes the abyss, and the abyss parts and makes salvific space. And so Israel goes into that salvific space, and they walk to dry land, on dry land, going to the land flowing with milk and honey. That's exactly like creation. God came to the abyss and parted the waters, and humanity is living on dry land. And then Pharaoh, in this ultimate presumption, thought, well, if there's salvific space for Israel, then I'll just use that salvific space. And so Pharaoh goes into the salvific space, and I wonder if that's what Paul means when he says God is the Savior of all men, especially those who believe. For a little while, God is holding the abyss back even from fallen humanity. We're existing right now, both saved and unsaved. We're existing in the salvific space. And so Pharaoh, in his presumption, goes into the salvific space. And as Israel exits, it says, the Lord looked down on Pharaoh. And that word, look down, is that exact same word that we saw in Psalm 14. It's the exact thing when God looks down in the flood, it's the exact word of looking down at Sodom and Gomorrah. It says the Lord looked down on Pharaoh. And then what he did is he removed the thing holding back the abyss, and the abyss covered. The reason modern commentators get so hung up with it being called the Reed Sea is because modern scholars, secular scholars, are foolish literary readers. Have you ever met somebody who's really smart, but they can't pick up when you're being sarcastic? Have you ever met somebody like that? Or you tell a joke? I remember I told a joke to this man one time who was like this world-class scholar, and I made a joke, and he didn't realize it was a joke, and he started trying to work through it, and I realized that, he's so kind of technically smart that he can't pick up on kind of stuff normal people pick up on. Well, this is irony. Pharaoh had thrown Israel in the reeds, and so now God is throwing Pharaoh in the reeds. He's throwing him in the Reed Sea. And he's using Pharaoh's unforced free will to accomplish exactly what God said would happen. That is, that however we're to understand God's sovereignty, it doesn't somehow undo a person's actions, but his sovereignty is so great that people do exactly what they want to do, and God is somehow using that to accomplish. Pharaoh throws himself in the Reed Sea. So, when we close today, if you're able to do the homework, did you pick up that there were a lot of dates given in that? Now, let me ask you a question, and you be honest. When you come to Scripture and it starts giving you a long list of names, how many of you get like really excited and say, "Oh my goodness, this is going to be great"? Oh, no. What about long list of dates? You know, so and so happened, and this. How many of you like get giddy when that happens? Oh, this is going to be great. Yeah, me either. In fact, I came up with a name for chapters like that. I call them skippers, right? When I was a local church pastor, I had a study routine where I would take a chapter of Greek and a chapter of Hebrew, and I would spend my study time studying those chapters. And I loved it. Spend 2 or 3 hours a day for a whole week in a Hebrew chapter, and it was delightful. And I remember the day I was in my office on a Monday morning. I don't think I really had computers then, but I was working through, it was either Genesis 7 or Genesis 8. And if you work through that chapter, it's just one long, list of days. And I remember on the Monday morning, I read it through in Hebrew. And I remember thinking to myself, really, God? A whole week with just numbers? And I remember thinking about just skipping it. It's like, do I really want to spend a whole week, trying to work through Hebrew numbers in this passage? And I don't know whether it's like I'm obsessive compulsive or whatever, but I just couldn't skip over it. But I have to admit, I wasn't really happy about spending a whole week with nothing but dates. And then the most glorious thing happened. And I want to share it with you. So these are the dates, right? Noah's giving the warning on 2:10. The flood happens 2:17 for 40 days. Waters prevail for 5 months. Then on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark rests on Ararat. Ararat means the curse. So on the 17th day of the 7th month, the ark rests on Cursed Mountain. On 10:1, the tops of the mountains appear. 11:10, the windows open. A raven and a dove go out. 11:17, the raven stays out. The dove doesn't. 11:17, the second dove comes back with the peace branch. 11:14, the third dove doesn't return. 1:1, Noah removes the covering, and 2:27, Noah comes out of the ark. And if you simply had a piece of paper and read through the text, those would be the dates that you get. And you think to yourself, that's just gobbledygook. Like, why in the world is God telling me that these dates are somehow important? So, would you give me just 5 minutes of your time? I'm gonna explain something about the Jewish calendar, and for 5 minutes you're gonna think that guy has lost his mind. Nothing good can come out of this, but would you give me 5 minutes just to explain the Jewish calendar? The Jewish calendar is a lunar calendar. That is, it's based on lunar cycles. And the lunar cycle is 29.5 days long. So what Jews do is they have a 12-month year, and they just alternate their months between 29 and 30 days. And what that means is that the first day of every month is what's called a new moon. And what is a new moon? Well, a new moon is a full moon, so it's completely round, but it has no light. You have to really look to see them. But when it's a completely round moon, but with no reflective light, that's a new moon. Because the cycle is 29.5 days, what that means is that halfway through the month is always the night of the full moon, right? So you've got a waxing moon until here, and then a waning moon until here. And that gives you your calendar. Jewish people use that calendar. Muslim people use that calendar. The Native Americans use that calendar because it's an easy way to count time. A lunar calendar. Now, if you're good at math, and you can add up 6 months of 30, that's 180 days. And then if you add 6 months of 29, I didn't do this in my head, it's 174. You add those two together, you get a 354-day year, which is going to be a mega problem, isn't it? because you're 11 days short of a solar calendar. So what Jewish people do, still do, is every 3 years they add a 13th month. It's like 2nd December, they call it in Hebrew. And because you're adding the days, that keeps your time, in track with the solar year. The way you keep all of it in line is by what's called the vernal and autumnal equinoxes. If you just count how long days are, 2 times a year, the day and night are exactly the same length. Those are called the equinoxes. One's in the fall, one's in the spring. And so that's what Jews do. They're looking for the first full moon after the spring equinox, and that's month 7. And then the first new moon after the autumnal equinox, and that's month 1. Now, no show of hands, but I imagine you're pretty much convinced right now that nothing good can come from this information. It's like, I wish you had spent your week studying something else, because this is just crazy. Really, lunar calendars, come on. These are the dates. God's word says it's the glory of God to conceal things, but the glory of kings to search them out. Anything important about these dates? I started asking myself that question. Do these dates correspond with anything in the so the Jewish calendar hadn't been implemented yet, but do these dates somehow correspond to something that is going to happen later in the Jewish calendar? And when I asked myself that question, this one was what jumped out at me. Because 210 is a date in the Jewish calendar. And this is the date. If in a Jewish calendar, in the first month of the year, the 10th day is Yom Kippur. It's the day of covering, just like Moses' mother covered it's called the day of covering. And the interesting thing about Yom Kippur is it's the one day the high priest can go into the Holy of Holies. And he offers a special offering, and it's like the day in the Jewish calendar. Well, what happens if you're unclean on that day? Like someone in your family died and you contracted uncleanness, and so you couldn't really celebrate Yom Kippur. There's a provision in the Bible that you can do it on 210. So as I started looking at these dates, I realized that like the flood is happening on either missed Yom Kippur or missed taking the Lamb Day. Those are parallel in the Jewish calendar. So it's like God makes a provision and then people miss the provision and God makes a second provision, and when God has just been so gracious, that's the day he says go into the ark. So I remember when I started asking about 210, it started becoming interesting to me. And I also realized that from 1/1, to 210 is 40 days. And that's really weird to me because you've got 40 days, you've got 7 days where they go in the ark, and then you have 40 days of judgment. And I remember thinking, oh, that's kind of elegant. You know, there may be some kind of elegance in this calendar. And so I started working through the dates, and I started just asking, do any of these other dates mean anything? And I come to this date, and I see that Noah comes out of the ark 11 days after, a year and 11 days after he went in the ark. In other words, even though he's using a lunar calendar, he manages to come out on the anniversary of what would be one solar year. And it made me realize that whoever's responsible for these dates, even though they're using this inferior lunar calendar, they somehow understand that the actual length of time for a year is 365 days. That seemed kind of interesting to me. But I have to admit, it wasn't until I asked myself the question, or I remembered, and I don't know if I put this in there, I didn't. I remembered that I had been keeping a list of all the dates in the Hebrew Bible. I'd been doing it for a long time. Anytime a date came up, I would just put it down on my sheet. And I remembered from the Passover that when the Passover happened, that God said, I want you to flip your calendar. I want the month that used to be the 7th month, I want it to be the 1st month now. And so the 1st month is going to become the 7th month. It's like he flipped his calendar's mirror, and he flips them so that they'll be 6 months out of phase. He says that in Exodus 12. And I remembered that. And so I wondered, is this date a flipped calendar or not a flipped calendar? And I began to ask the question, well, if it's not a flipped calendar, then this would be like 3 days after the start of the Feast of Weeks. But I remember asking myself the question, what if it's a flipped calendar? If it's a flipped calendar, that means 7/17 is what we would call 1/17. And I knew that 1/10 was the Take in the Lamb day. And I knew that the lamb was slaughtered on the night of the 14th and 15th. And so I thought, oh, that's telling me it's 3 days after Passover. And I remember I was sitting there with my Hebrew Bible. It was open on my desk. And can be an oral or a verbal processor. And I remember asking the question out loud, did anything significant in the Bible happen 3 days? And that's as far as I got in the sentence. Because there is something significant in the Bible that happens 3 days after Passover. I'm trying to remember what it is. I know it's really important. And I know it happened in the New Testament. And I remember I had to push my Hebrew Bible, and I just stared at it. Because it's the glory of God to conceal things. It's the glory of kings to search them out. There's a reason why we think the Bible is hard to understand. And that is because we skip stuff. We skip stuff and, it's there, but it's like nothing good can come from a lunar calendar and, vernal equinoxes and, just come on. Well, the truth is that God has hidden the story of Jesus in plain sight on every single page of the Bible. And he's done it where anybody can see it. But he's not going to make the connections for us. He's going to leave it for us to find out. So, what I'm trying to persuade you of is that the entire Bible is about Jesus. Start looking for Jesus when you read the Bible. Start looking for connections. If the story's positive, ask how is this like Christ? If it's negative, ask how is it a contrast to Christ? If dates are given, if places are given, if times are given, start asking the question, is this somehow related to Jesus? And what you're going to find over and over and over and over and over again is that all of it's related to Jesus. And that's what we'll look at next time. I'll see you then.